What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dynasty Rankings podcast. I'm your host, Nate Liss. You can find me on Twitter at @AnOutrageJew. And with me, of course, is Alexander McKenzie. You can find him on Twitter at JackUpOnMountainDew. We are recording on Halloween evening now. Where Alexander is, there may already be trick-or-treaters. Where I am located, they have yet to show up. It is 4:30 p.m., would be a touch early for them. And for those of you that are watching on Spotify, for those of you that are on YouTube, if you're on YouTube, by the way, make sure you hit the like button as we get into this episode. Of course, if you enjoy the content you see, hit subscribe. But for those of you that are watching the episode, you may notice that Alexander and I are in, well, we got costumes on the head at least, right? And what are you supposed to be?
I'm just one of those. I thought long and hard about this, and I decided to go as a rebuilder this year. So shout out to all my 1-7, and maybe shoot, if you're 0-8, I feel for you. So I'm dressed as you today.
Well, I guess that must mean, as I've donned the crown and these pretty sweet Macho Man-esque glasses, I'm a contender. I'm arrogant. I'm ready. I'm overconfident, and I'm prepared for my best players to crap the bed when I need them most. And then such is life. So anyways, it's funny because I said 2 weeks ago on the show that the episode that we put out did really well. The episode that we put out last week actually doubled the episode the week prior. It was a pretty monster performance by this audience. So appreciate all you guys. Give yourself a round of applause. And I actually think I've got an applause sound effect right there for you. So thank you, everybody that's been tuning in. Of course, again, thank you to all of our new subscribers as we kick this content off. Now, this was a really interesting week. Now, Alexander, also, by the way, you don't have to keep the mask on. You can keep it on as long as you want.
Oh, thank God.
But, okay, let me ask you one question before I get into this. In terms of trick-or-treating, what is too early to start trick-or-treating? Like, what was your barometer when you knew it was time to go trick-or-treat?
I know back in the day now they all like to go really early, and stuff. Maybe really depends on the age. But when you were of age to go, you want to go at night. That's the experience, right? So right when the sun down, kind of got the, the glimmer of the sunlight coming out. I feel like the candy just tastes better when it's around that time,
So the candy just hits different.
It just hits different, Yeah. So got a little moonlight in there. Yeah, that Snickers bar tastes way better.
Yeah. So. No, I feel that. Sometimes we get them a little too early, and I gotta lecture them. I gotta go, guys. It's gotta be a little dark out here. So why don't you go make a lap around the block? Come on back. And I'll hook you up. I'll hook you up with candy.
Wait, no. So here's the question. Here's a question.
Yeah.
So what do you usually give kids? You give them candy bars? Or you giving apples? What are you doing? You're not giving them apples, are you?
Well, listen, my people typically frugal, so I would be lying if I didn't say half the bowl of candy is some of the candy from last year, probably.
No, there's no problem with that.
No, there's no problem with that. But no, I don't know. We get the fun size bags. The problem is we end up buying too many bags. And then I end up eating most of the candy. So it's self-destructive at a baseline, but also kind of like it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the best part. It's like when you still have so much left and you're like, oh, shoot, somebody's got to eat this. So
that's why I'm here, man. This is what I do. This is what I live for. Now, I want to start out this episode because it's all the YouTube people are like, God damn it, get to the goddamn show. So, all right, we're going to get to the show. So I kind of want to jump in right off the bat and talk about a player. This is going to be 2 quick blurbs because we did hit these players last week, but interestingly enough, they both came up and performed in a manner this week that was enough for most fantasy gamers or dynasty gamers, that is, to sort of turn their head with a little recognition and be like, oh, shit, all right, I should have listened last week. So first player that I want to bring up as I'm trying to scramble to get this pulled up on the screen would be Quentin Johnston. Now, Quentin Johnston was a player that, again, for most, was somewhat dead in the water, like Show me what you can do. I've been waiting for this. You're a first-round pick. You've got this athleticism. You were drafted to a great situation. You've got Justin Herbert. Mike Williams is hurt, right? A list of items, and he hadn't done anything yet. But just last week, as we pull up the game log here, 6 targets, 5 catches, 50 yards. Not a dominating performance, but at this point, with a guy like Quentin Johnston, it was a performance.
Absolutely. It was a sign of life. I mean, we were all getting scared here. It was, the Halloween season. Maybe that's kind of what the Chargers were trying to do to us, scare us into thinking Quentin Johnston was legitimately a bust. I mean, obviously, the usage up to this point is not great, but I think 6 targets, it's a little bit more reassuring that he has some opportunity in his offense. But that's off of maybe Josh Palmer getting hurt. So we got to see him get more games in here to perform. But I thought that they try to use him in space a lot more, and maybe have some more snaps that are catered towards his skill set. But again, on the year, he just needs more usage in this offense for us to be more confident in really what kind of player he is.
I think it's pretty amazing when you look on here again, when we're trying to figure out the profile of Quentin Johnston. We know he's a yak guy. We know he's a guy that needs to be put into space. But what you do like about his profile here is that he's top 11 in average target distance. So he is coming with that big play factor. What else I do like is when we look, his unrealized air yards, despite not that high, top 56 at the position, despite the fact that he's basically the wide receiver 90 in total targets. So there is deep play, big play ability there, and I think the team is realizing we need to get this guy into space. So it will be interesting going forward to see what they do, but the developments on him are at least positive, more so than even we've seen from some of these other players that people keep attempting to kick the can down the road on, which we will mention in just a little bit. By the way, I'm going to try to force a lot of Halloween puns in this episode. So I don't have one yet, but I'm going to have one in a minute.
All right, I'll be on the lookout.
Jayden Reed, though. Jayden Reed. Very interesting week 8. What did we see from Jayden Reed in week 8 that was so impressive outside of sort of this starter performance from him?
Well, at wide receiver 8, he was wide receiver 8 in routes run, and he had obviously had the 4 catches for 83 yards. He's getting way more usage in the offense, and that's wide receiver 8 for week 8, putting him right behind Tyreek Hill. So we talked about this in the previous episode about what the skill set he has. He was getting, he was buoyed by the fact that he has 3 receiving touchdowns on the year. He is one. I think he was top 5 in red zone targets. He's one of those receivers that has a great profile. This is kind of an offense where they're not sure who the one is. It may not be Romeo Dobbs. Christian Watson looks like he's been struggling, especially with injury. And again, the offense as a whole isn't great and still working on getting better. But I think it's reassuring that he has some opportunity as you hear the doorbell ring, hopefully in the background from trick-or-treaters coming to my house. So, I think Jayden Reed usage looked great, and I think it's wheels up for him this year.
I think it was a great game. I think that this was one of those subtle performances that help indicate the buy factor with a guy like this, but not so much so that everybody's rushing out to get him, right? And so this is a guy that we've talked about already a couple games this year where we've seen 8 targets, 7 targets. The air yards have been favorable for him for part of the year as well. But again, as you mentioned, we just don't really know what this team looks like going forward. But if you are betting, he would be one of the wide receivers in this offense, if not potentially the wide receiver to own, as we mentioned last week, entering 2024. So something to keep an eye on. But as you mentioned, really important, the overall routes run being top 6 or top 8 at the position, right in that range of Tyreek Hill, right in that range of a couple of these other star players. So really impressive performance from him. Now, one of the things that was really sad about week 8 was that we lost one of the most pivotal quarterbacks in terms of fantasy production for the players in his offense, and that is Kirk Cousins. Losing Kirk Cousins in Minnesota is going to hurt. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to hurt. Now, is it going to hurt on the volume standpoint? Yeah, I think it's going to hurt on the volume standpoint a little bit. It's really going to hurt on the efficiency standpoint, though, and I think that's where my biggest concern comes in. But where are we at on the Kirk Cousins thing, and what does this mean for the wide receivers, namely Jordan Addison, Hawkinson, of course, Justin Jefferson when he returns in this offense? Because prior to Minnesota having this little bit of wind at their back, Kirk Cousins was sort of a trade candidate. Kirk Cousins was a player that they had mentioned maybe not coming back to Minnesota. So here we are now. The injury has certainly cost him his 2023 season. Where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, again, you alluded to it. The volume is going to dip significantly. Obviously, moving on with Joshua Dobbs. I mean, he was like number one in pass attempts, as you see there. He was passing at 38.9 pass attempts per game. The volume will be gone. I think, yes, the efficiency will be gone as well. It'll be a question of which one of these players in this offense kind of is the target leader again. You would assume it's Justin Jefferson, obviously, because he's the best wide receiver in football. But I believe, I can't remember the specific stat, but Joshua Dobbs is top 10 in there in tight end targets. So Hawkinson may see still sustained volume, but it won't be to the level that it was with Kirk Cousins. I think you kind of downgrade everyone, and I think once Jefferson is back, Addison is still super efficient with his targets and his receptions, but I think he's kind of gets downgraded to more of a boomer bust player because, again, it will be Jefferson, then Hawkinson, then Addison in this offense.
So currently the Arizona Cardinals, and I believe Dobbs has started every game. The tight end position, he's number 2 in the NFL and tight end target rate at 32.2%. So very high. Also, that was a team that was struggling with weapons as well. So with Zach Ertz there and some of these other guys, offensive line issues, I'm sure, too. But the one thing I wanted to say is in 56, and I believe it's 56 career games that Jefferson has played with Kirk Cousins, he and Kirk Cousins have played together 55 times. So we have really yet to see Justin Jefferson without Kirk Cousins. However, back when people told me that Kellen Mond was a dog and that Kellen Mond was the guy to own and that Kellen Mond had all this upside and that Kellen Mond was going to take Kirk Cousins' job, they started Sean Mannion in a game when they needed a starting quarterback. And in that game, we saw 11 targets, 6 catches, 58 receiving yards for Justin Jefferson. Now he inherits Joshua Dobbs, who presumably is going to hold this job down till the end of the year, but he had a wide receiver target rate in Arizona of 55.9%, which was number 26 in the NFL with Arizona. And again, this is number 14 in team pass attempts while only trailing about 54.7% of the time. Arizona's actually been playing in some closer games. What I wanted to mention, though, is that Marquise Brown, while playing with Dobbs, was the most targeted wide receiver, and he was only seeing 8.6 per game. So let's pull up Arizona here for a second. I'm going to cycle it. Marquise Brown, 8.6 targets per game. Michael Wilson, number 2 on the team at 4.1. So fortunately for Jordan Addison, he's an incredibly efficient player, because I think really where the loss comes in is think about the history of Kirk Cousins, whether it was Adam Thielen, whether it was Diggs, whether it was Justin Jefferson. Now we've seen it with Addison. We just know, we've talked about this. There are some quarterbacks, whether it's Stafford, whether it's Rodgers, these guys will lock in on a receiver, and it's part of their DNA. It's part of their code. It's not in Dobbs' code. So when we look at guys like Marquise Brown at 8.6, I'm just concerned that, maybe now with Justin Jefferson, he's in that 9 to 10 range. I'm sure he can still hold it, but I think we have to be more concerned about everybody down the line from him, and that's my biggest fear. And greater than that is Kirk Cousins coming back to Minnesota, and what do they do if he doesn't?
Yeah, I think you'd have to assume that. I mean, they only gave a 6th-round pick for Dobbs. Cousins says at the end of the year, end of his deal, right? I think at the end of the year, and then
right now.
Yeah, and then, this is a guy that was already in conversation about being traded because they had such a slow start, and they had gotten the momentum there on the Monday night game against the Niners. But yeah, it's unfortunate he tore his Achilles. But he's 35 years old.
Yep.
could be a conversation. They just kind of let him move on, and then if they just ride with Dobbs, I think Dobbs got 2 wins this season. Arguably a better team with the Vikings, but I can't imagine them not being in the top 10 in draft capital, that they don't potentially try to make a move for one of these, top end quarterbacks, Drake May, Caleb Williams. I mean, that's the dream, right? If they move off of Cousins and they stay bad, if you're a Jefferson owner, you are desperately wanting them to get one of these elite quarterbacks, so then you can have, Jefferson come back and be one of these guys. I just was hoping that maybe more of another veteran presence outside of Joshua Dobbs from Arizona to the Minnesota Vikings.
I just don't see how, if you're Minnesota, you let Kirk Cousins go. Coming off of this injury, look, Aaron Rodgers is multiple years older than he is. He's planning on coming back. I just don't see how at 35, yes, it's going to cost him a year, but was mobility Kirk Cousins' hallmark? It never was. So I don't know that, especially with how good he was playing, if you're Kirk Cousins, I guess unless you're trying to chase a ring and you want to start over with a new team and a new city with new players and a new playbook and a new coaching staff, you can do that. But if it's about money, you're probably going to get the money you want in Minnesota. You're already playing with the best receiver in the league. You now have Jordan Addison. You've got TJ Hawkinson. I don't understand why he leaves. So as much as I do buy into the idea that there was a chance he did leave because money talks, how much more fruitful is the situation anywhere else? Thinking just off the top of the head, contending rosters, where is he going to go that's better than Minnesota right now? I just feel like the situation was so prime. Plus he gets, half his season is inside. It's not the worst situation in the world. So it makes Kirk Cousins a really interesting buy in Dynasty too, by the way, because we just kind of look at his body of work over the last couple of years. I mean, for the last 4 years, he's averaged at least 18 fantasy points per game. But if you were to look at rankings, if you were to listen to speak from Dynasty players and fantasy gamers, it felt like he was averaging 13 fantasy points per game. He's just been great, and he plays with Justin Jefferson, and he seemed like he was at his most efficient this year. So it's going to be very interesting to see what they do. I like Kirk, but I think you have to downgrade everybody in this offense from an efficiency standpoint, and everybody but Justin Jefferson, I certainly become much more concerned about in terms of overall target share.
Absolutely. I agree. It'd be interesting to see what Minnesota does, right? Again, I think it could have been just rumors spilled from the fact that the slow start for the Vikings, but this was one of the top teams in the NFC. And again, they could re-sign him to a long-term deal to stay for maybe 2 or 3 years. And maybe that kind of holds down that offense, and they make another attempt at trying to be a contender and going into the Super Bowl and stuff like that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the team does after in this offseason and with Kirk Cousins.
It's funny to me. If you fancy yourself a team that's trying to be competitive and quarterback is the most important position on the field, and you've already got a guy who's been really good, who knows your system, who has rapport with all your players, why would you let him go unless you're going to draft a player, unless you're going to go younger, unless you're going to trade for Kyler? I don't understand why you let him go. And I guess that's up to Kirk really at the end of the day, being a free agent, but I just can't imagine they let him go. That's kind of my 2 cents. I feel like at the end of the day, he's going to be a Viking in the future, even if it's on this repeat 1-year deal thing, which he just did. I could see that taking place. Works out both ends. He gets a chance to rehab himself. If he doesn't want to be in Minnesota and he proves himself, he can go elsewhere because he's not going to be better than the system he's already been in. And for Minnesota, if they want to wait another year to go and make a play on some sort of rookie or a younger player, that exists for them as well. Speaking of younger quarterbacks, though, there was one player, shout-outs to Cody Carpentier, who was probably the most prolific Will Levis tout that there is. And I think a lot of people gave Cody crap, saying Will Levis is no good. This guy, all he does is eats mayonnaise sandwiches or dips bananas in mayonnaise. I don't really know what the fuck you do with mayonnaise. All I do know is when he came out in week 1 and his number was called to play, he absolutely smashed, and Cody was well represented.
Absolutely. Cody kind of hit the nail on the talent spectrum. I think it was fairly evident that, you saw the arm talent that Will Levis has. I mean, with the 65 completion percentage, 8.2 yards per attempt, and then those 4 deep passing touchdowns, equating to 26 fantasy points. It's one of the best starts for a rookie ever, right? And so we saw what Cody saw in this player and the talent that he has, and I think it maybe potentially surprised some people because of sort of the all the negatives that were brought up about him, and really not negatives about other players within this draft class. I think Will Levis evidently has talent, and I think interested to see what he does long term. And again, we've kind of talked about this pre-show, really what kind of player he could be in the future. And it's kind of a mixed bag. He could be someone super efficient, but the deep balls, what kind of offense? It's a question of what kind of offense this will be long term. I mean, they decided to keep Henry, so who knows what they do? I think they still kind of feed Henry and build off the play action with Levis. And you had talked about earlier that Malik Willis and Tannehill were both heavy deep ball pass attempts this year. So it could be that this was sort of what the offense is. He's that much better at throwing it deep, and caters more to what the style of play that they want to do. But yeah, I think based on his profile, it was a mixed bag. Not sure what you would get, but you definitely got to see the arm talent on display today, or not today, Sunday.
It is Halloween. You look at Ryan Tannehill, and if you guys are watching on the screen, Ryan Tannehill, prior to injury, was number 1 in the NFL in deep ball attempt rate at 18.4%. And again, prior to the injury, he was also way up there in total deep balls. I think he was at the top of the league at one point. But now we look at Will Levis in this offense, and Will Levis was throwing it downfield at an incredible rate as well, and I could sort this here in a minute. But you look at Tannehill this year, and this is what's really interesting. Over the last 6 seasons, prior to this season, Tannehill was no better than the QB 24 in deep ball pass attempts. Then suddenly Ryan Tannehill is leading the league in deep ball pass attempts. ADOT 30.0, top 9 at the position. Shocking from Ryan Tannehill, a guy that wasn't doing it prior. So there was a bit of an evolution in this offense, which is really interesting because this is something in Will Levis's game that Cody had noted too. One of the big things for Cody about Will Levis was just the upside, the arm talent, the arm strength, the creativity. And we're seeing a lot of that sort of transferable playmaking happen in real time. And then we look at this offense. He really did. He turned DeAndre Hopkins from essentially a ghost. 3 years ago, people told me that he was the Walking Dead 3 years ago. Right?
Yeah, no, I remember it. Yeah, they said he was never going to come back. And then, you thought he would just, Tennessee was one of those teams where these veteran wide receivers, someone like Julio Jones, just goes and doesn't have really any fantasy production, and just a kind of a barren wasteland for wide receivers like that. So, yeah, he opened up DeAndre Hopkins. And again, I think one of the big things Cody also alluded to is the receivers that Levis had at Kentucky were really, outside of Wan'Dale Robinson, who was his number 1, none of those guys were taller than 5'8", 5'9" in that offense. We really never got to really see what Levis could be. And so that just shows you how much talent he had coming into this draft, with the fact that these are those kind of players that he had at that time. And now he gets to have players like Hopkins, who evidently, obviously, is still pretty good at this point. And Chig, who we were all super high on last year, coming into this offense. But again, we talked about Tannehill underwhelming significantly in passer rating and efficiencies. He was throwing it deep, but he wasn't efficient with it. Now we get to see these guys like Chig Okonkwo. I can't say his name. I'm so sorry. And then Hopkins.
And, you don't have to apologize.
Yeah. But then maybe we get to see somebody like Treylon Burks. Maybe get to see a little bit more of him, but it'd be interesting to see what they do with this offense with Levis now.
Well, I sorted this to week 8 so that we could look at Tennessee as a whole. Chig, 6 targets. DeAndre Hopkins, 5. Of course, as you mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins, 3 touchdowns, 4 catches, 128 receiving yards. Unbelievable game. Renaissance performance. Won't do it again, I feel like, but that was a mega performance. But more targets could be coming his way if that rapport is built between these two players. I mean, to be fair, when Levis was in diapers, that was DeAndre Hopkins' rookie season. So he's seen him play for a long time. But then you go down the list. Tyjae Spears, 4 targets. Kyle Phillips, 3 targets. By the way, I haven't said Treylon Burks' name. Hold on. Derrick Henry, 3 targets. Then we get to Treylon Burks, 2 targets. Not surprisingly, no catches to be expected. And then Nick Westbrook, 1 catch for 33 yards. There's so many reasons to like Treylon Burks, but I keep coming back to the fact that, yes, he has the draft capital. Yes, he has the athleticism. Yes, he has a resume with college production, the yards after the catch, the big playability, the short area quickness if you're going to get him the ball and watch what he does with it in his hands. But yet, he's not being targeted when he's on the field. And when he's not been healthy a multitude of times, as you and I have talked about in the past, Vrabel was doghousing this guy to start the year. And I think some of this was here last year. And it's like, what is it going to take to light a fire under Treylon Burks' ass? And I don't know what that's going to take, but I understand how it works in Dynasty. You see Will Levis play good and necessarily go, oh, also Treylon Burks will play good. Now, I don't know that that's going to be the case, but I can at least say that now there is what we hope competent quarterback play with creative design. And I understand why they kept Derrick Henry, because why not give Will Levis, one of the best backs in history, who's still running somewhat effectively? You just hope that Treylon Burks' role grows and his rapport with Will Levis grows, because I can tell you at this point that whatever you thought Treylon Burks was going to be in terms of ceilings when he came in, we have to necessarily now lower that ceiling. It's an incredibly rare case where a player is looked at as the next A.J. Brown, and then they don't do a damn thing for 2 years, and then they turn into A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was still elite despite very low opportunity. All the metrics said this guy's amazing. I don't know what metrics people are looking at that leads them to say Treylon Burks is going to be a monster, because I would struggle to start him in head-to-head leagues at this point.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about it. Burks may be more of a player that's best in best ball. It's a big projection because the usage really hasn't been there at all. Coaching staff doesn't seem to be very confident in him, and I'd be curious what he has in this offense. Again, this year alone, I think he's only played 4 games. He's had a sporadic target or snap share the season before. So we got to see a little bit of him last year, but again, the first 4 weeks of the game, 90% snap share, 63%, 72%. He's on the field. He should be getting, he's our first round pick that they thought, they were getting a 1-for-1. Obviously they were wrong, because he's nowhere near AJ Brown talent level. But again, there's still a talented player that we still haven't seen a lot of. But again, we have to kind of temper expectations, right? And I think everyone is tempering expectations, but it's definitely one of those players. Like we talk about Jayden Reed, we talk about Quentin Johnston. Obviously, these guys are in their rookie years, but I think Burks is hard to project because he's not even seeing enough targets for us to be confident into what he would be in this offense. So I think more games could come in there. Maybe you can be ahead of the curve and try to go and snag him for cheap and stuff like that. But I think it's more of a buyer's beware of a player like this, because he may not end up being anything just because he's just not being utilized in any sort of facet in this offense. But the one thing that can make it happen is having, a complete revamp of the offense and being more pass heavy with a way more efficient downfield passer like Levis. But
The concern at the end of the day to me is much of what we saw from Rashad Bateman, right? There was
yep.
this whimsical, carefree, we got to support our guy. Everybody hold hands. It's got to get better. And it never did. And guess what? It persisted so long with injuries and lack of production. And again, everybody out there that's listening that's like, that's not right. Rashad Bateman was great. Yeah, wasn't he averaging like 5.3 targets per game when he was healthy? That's not good, guys. Go look it up. That's actually not good. But the problem was nobody ever had the balls to go, maybe I should cut bait on Rashad Bateman because he's just maybe not going to be as great as we thought originally. And I think that that's the case with Treylon Burks. And you and I keep talking about this study we want to do, but I think it's true. I think when you see these guys start to sort of underperform and not be given opportunities, the team has no weapons. They have no weapons, and he's still not being heavily targeted in this offense. So I think the concern is that we're year 2. Well, what happened to Treylon or what happened to Rashad Bateman when we hit year 3? He got Zay Flowers all of a sudden. Yeah. So it's very easy with a young quarterback, and we see this happen almost annually. You want to go get them a receiver that can make them better. You want to go get a receiver that you can build this rapport with. And it would not shock me in the least if we saw a team like Tennessee go and invest a second-round pick in a guy next year, and if he's a player that we like, then all of a sudden, if Treylon Burks has struggled all year long, it's going to be this battle of, again, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, or in this case, Christian Watson, and possibly if Jayden Reed strings together a couple good games. Like, now you're going, oh crap, first-round guy is being embattled by second-round guy. First-round guy hasn't been phenomenal like he was a year prior. And all of a sudden now you see this changing of the guards. But there's 2 things at play here. There's Dynasty gamers, analysis, belief, philosophy, and there's what's actually happening on the field. So it's not over for Treylon Burks. I think there's still a lot of upside here, but all signs indicate that the ceiling is much lower than we thought it was going to be originally. And for me now, if Levis is this big play, this big play passer, I almost prefer Treylon Burks in sort of that, best ball setting, only because I just don't know when you start him if he's hardly being targeted. And if you're not being targeted in year 2, damn, I just don't think you're going to be targeted in year 3.
Yeah, I mean, again, those are all valid points, and I think, it's just he is way more of a projection now at this point. He is not at all close to what anybody thought he was coming into the league as a rookie. I think, but again, I think the volume could be up. Obviously they traded their safety away, so their defense could be struggling a little bit more. They're all pro safety, so they still got a good defense overall, but who knows what really this offense could, again, see more volume, so he could have usage, but again, it could be more leaning towards best ball.
Speaking of seeing more volume, there are 2 running backs. And by the way, to the audience of this network, the subscriber base, the viewers that have seen videos, content that I've made in the past, I made a Kenneth Walker video this offseason. And many of you got very, very nasty with your commentary. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of views later, and what felt like hundreds and hundreds of comments of people telling me, L-take, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. And then here we are in week 8. And we've seen some of this already sort of revealing itself. I've had a couple people come at me on YouTube demanding I apologize. Demanding that I give them an apology. I get down on a knee and I apologize. And I apologize to no man for this call. So the Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet saga, I want to talk about this, but before I do, I want to let Pete Carroll talk about this, because for those of you that don't know, I believe Kenneth Walker did not practice on Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday, and I believe he was cleared by Friday, Saturday, Sunday, no longer on the injury report. So by all accounts, healthy, and then things that were unexpected took place. Let's listen to Pete.
Was there anything to going to Zach and then in the fourth quarter with the over Ken and over DJ?
No, it was just kind of, he hadn't had a lot of opportunities. We just want to make sure that he played and got a chance to contribute. And when he did well, we stayed with it. We didn't feel like we needed to roll him out of there. He looked very good at the end of the game. He blocking in and running the football. So we're very fortunate to have both those guys going at it right now and just keep it going.
What makes Zach Charbonnet so efficient in his play and execution of it?
Why?
Yeah.
He gets it, the game comes easy to him. He understands. He's really disciplined. Very accountable kid. I mean, when you tell him something, he does it as close to exactly the way you tell him, and he's able to, adapt in the flow of things and come up with the right choices and decisions to make things work out. It's hard for a young guy to do the blitz pickup and the pass protection stuff. He hasn't had a problem with it at all, and he's physical enough to take care of it. So he just offers us kind of a full-bodied guy. He can do it. He can run. He can catch it. He can block, and he's been very effective on special teams as well. He's done a nice job on the punt team and done some really good things for us. So he's an all-around player that we really trust, and he's given us all the reason to do that.
I think Pete Carroll's Woody pushed that podium about 4 inches further towards the crowd. So good. So anyways, let's get serious here for a minute. It's Halloween. Very fortunate. He gets it. The game comes easy to him. Blitz pickups aren't easy. He hasn't had a problem with it. Every single thing that Pete Carroll said about Zach Charbonnet was just dripping in excitement and passion and happiness. And as we talked about, there was always this risk with Kenneth Walker. And the reason was, and you had mentioned this off air, he has to be a guy like Nick Chubb, right? Like, you have to be so efficient as a pure runner, because as my video in the offseason alluded to, he was never really a pass catcher. That was something we saw coming out of college. That was something we witnessed last year when he only averaged 2.3 targets per game. Here we are. It's week 8. He's only averaging 2.7. And for those of you guys that forgot, he's been absolutely buoyed by rushing touchdowns this year. If not for the rushing touchdowns, the guy had 111 total yards and scored 13 fantasy points. He was the running back 19 with 111 rushing yards. What does that tell you? I mean, it's just, this was the cause for concern all along. With that being said, and I haven't said he's a bad player at all. That was never said in any videos. I haven't said it now. He's an awesome player. You guys are right. He's lightning. Charbonnet is thunder. Well, guess what? Lightning and thunder, they're always together. So we're going to see a hell of a lot more of it going forward. And with Pete Carroll's words here and the injury history that Seattle has experienced year over year over year, and the draft capital put into this guy and how well he's been playing, guess what? Buckle up, motherfucker, because it's not ending anytime soon.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard because, again, you alluded to this. Kenneth Walker's not a bad player. He's electric, right? He's an electric,
He's awesome.
super efficient rusher, right? But what he's required to do is he needs to have red zone touches and touchdowns in order to buoy his fantasy points. The concern was that his volume was going to be cut in half because Charbonnet is no slouch. He was coming in as one of the highly regarded rookie running backs in this class. He just happened to go into one of the worst landing spots because Kenneth Walker was just that damn good. It wasn't that it was Kenneth Walker versus Charbonnet. It was the fact that both of these guys were that damn good that they would cannibalize each other in this offense. And that's what you're starting to see now at this point, was Charbonnet is starting to eat into this offense. In week 8, Kenneth Walker was outsnapped by Charbonnet 31-24. Kenneth Walker, so that's a 59% snap share for Charbonnet. All right. And then now, yeah, you're going to say that he had 8 carries for 66 yards with Kenneth Walker, but I mean, it was 5 carries for 53. So no one is leading this team heavily in the rushing volume. And then the biggest kicker is routes, Charbonnet 22, Walker 11. So you already heard Blitz pick up conversation stuff about with that Pete Carroll interview, and then on the year, Charbonnet, granted, he probably doesn't have that. It's a lower volume, but Charbonnet on the year is 5.8 yards per carry. And that team's going to look at that, and they're going to be like, well, we need to give him more touches, as evident by what Pete Carroll had just said. So the problem was not that Kenneth Walker sucks or that Charbonnet was better. It was that both these guys are damn good, and they're just going to take each other's volume, and nobody's going to be really a winner from this offense. The one plus about Charbonnet that we mentioned is the fact that Charbonnet was just that damn good in the passing game as well at UCLA. And then it's just a conversation that like one of the next man up type of guy. If Kenneth Walker goes down, my gosh, Zach Charbonnet is an elite player at this point, right? If elite option, if Kenneth Walker ever goes down, it's fairly evident that like the talent profile is there. It was just unfortunate that that Charbonnet went to this offense because they will do better. And then obviously you're showing the pass blocking right here. Charbonnet's out there significantly better than Kenneth Walker, so he's going to be out. He's starting to eat into that volume, eat into that snap share. I don't know if there ever will be a clear winner in this backfield between the two, but I think that they will both be that. They're both that damn good that it's just going to be unfortunate. But I would lean more towards the targets if I had an option. I mean, year two, what does this backfield look like if Charbonnet is integrating this offense and getting more pass volume than Kenneth Walker?
You guys made it so hard. It could have been easy. We didn't have to do this. It didn't have to be this way. You guys made it this way, right? Like it didn't have to be this way. With that being said, there's at no point in the analysis that I had about Kenneth Walker did I say that Charbonnet was going to run away with the job, but it was concerning both ways because I think this has all the makings, as Pete may or may not have alluded to, of kind of a hot hand scenario. If they're both getting rotating drives or rotating touches and one guy's just being more effective in the function of an offense, or they need to beat up on a defense earlier, they're probably going to go to Charbonnet, and once they're softened up, you're going to see Walker get his opportunities. It's a really dynamic backfield. So with that being said, it's concerning overall for both players, if we're being quite honest, because Seattle's really not, and I'll pull it up over here, the one big thing that the counter to it that you could say is that Seattle's not really the running back pass-heavy targeting team, and they're down here. They're in the bottom 8 of the league at 15.6% running back target rate. Never has this been a function of the Seattle backfield. I know they tried it once upon a time. They had Fred Jackson. They tried to do it with CJ Procise. They thought they were going to cook this up. Russell Wilson was never that guy. And then here we are now, still 15.6%. It's really just not a hallmark or a staple of this offense. So with that being said, is there a lot to say about this? Not really, but this is the cause for concern that existed all along. And the minute that Charbonnet starts to get some of this opportunity in the red zone, it's going to get even uglier because, again, I think those touchdowns were a significant factor in part of this audience's ability to come find me in the streets and try to read me the riot act because Kenneth Walker had 17 carries for 41 yards and 2 touchdowns, and you were like, suck it. I'm like, suck what? He was horrible. Stop it. Just stop it. All right. Do you have anything else to add on this subject?
I just think your hope is that if it ends up turning into like a Nick Chubb Kareem Hunt where both of them are somewhat viable, they're both great players. But yeah, it's tough to decide really what's going to happen or foresee what's going to happen with these two guys.
Hope. I barely knew her. I think that the problem too. Do I have a sound effect? Oh, I do. Hey. Be here all week. I think that the other issue too is with all the passing options in this game. It's like, if you have Kenneth Walker, you're like run the ball a lot. If you have DK Metcalf and JSN and Lockett, you're like throw the ball a lot. Like I don't know if it can go both ways. Okay, Jahan Dotson, interesting name. Now we were gonna have him on a show a couple weeks ago, didn't feature. Here we are again, coming off of a really impressive week for him, and something that I know you're going to want to bring up, so I'm going to slide to the screen after I'm done sort of laying this out. first-round pick just a year or two ago. Sam Howell now at quarterback, so the passing volume is incredibly high with Washington. We've got him right here. Sam Howell, number 2 in the league in pass attempts per game at 38.5. So the volume is there. What is there to like about Jahan Dotson? And what we saw this week, is that sort of a prelude to what may be coming?
I mean, coming into this season, he was one of the guys who was supposed to be making this year 2 leap, because in 2022 he played significantly well, and I also had a lot of receiving touchdowns in that year. But you saw the route running, you saw the ability to get open, the ability to make contested catches. So he was one of those guys that everyone was thinking that was a buy low guy in drafts, or go and buy from somebody else, because he had so much potential upside, especially with Sam Howell, and you showed how many second in pass attempts in the league. With week 8, it just showed, signs of life. Basically, he had 10 targets, 8 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown. But the other thing that kind of showed you that he was still going to potentially be a part of this offense, especially so pass heavy, that all season long he had at least an 80 all season long so far this year, 81% snap share. And so on the year, again, he's wide receiver 36 in targets, but he's wide receiver 6 in routes run on the season. So I foresee this team to continue to be in shootouts, because the corners for this defense are pretty horrible, coupled with the fact that now they just traded both of their star defensive ends for picks. I think this just shows you that Washington is one of those teams that's just always going to be throwing the ball a ton, if not more than what they already are doing now. And now that Jahan Dotson is starting to see some more targets, it helps out, because we had already seen some of this ability the year prior with someone like Taylor Heineke, but now we've got Sam Howell, who's slightly better. I mean, some people will argue that it's not, but because of the turnovers with Howell and sacks, but it's a better offense because they are throwing a lot more and having the ability to be in more shootouts. But the defense will continue to make that be sure. So I think this is one of those guys that I would be trying to buy, because again, this team is going to be throwing a lot.
They already are, and yeah, I agree. I think they're going to be throwing a lot. And this is one of Sam Howell's hallmarks. I mean, Sam Howell is a slinger. And you and I had talked about this. I think Howell was the best quarterback in that class, and I'm not really sure it was close. I don't know how Kenny Pickett went to where Pickett did, but Howell was a guy that just had destroyed from his very first season in North Carolina. And some of these players had since left. Like, he's actually reunited with De'Ami Brown. But some of these players had left that situation, and he was in this broken situation the last year where he found himself rushing more after Lyman left, and he lost both of his running backs, and he lost De'Ami and receivers. But looking for him now, Jahan Dotson. I'm trying to pull him up real quick so that we could get a evaluation.
Right at the bottom.
Where?
Right at the bottom there.
Goddamn glasses.
111.
There he is. Found him. Wide receiver 44, slap right between the nougaty filling between Gabe Davis and Jerry Jeudy.
Oof.
Yeah. Jeudy is a fallen star, obviously. But Jahan Dotson, it's an interesting spot for him, because if he keeps this up, like if these opportunities continue to reveal themselves, it's such a far leap. Because if we look at the ladder going up, it's Gabe Davis, Hopkins, Quentin Johnston, Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper, Jacoby Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, Josh Downs, Marquise Brown. Like, he could really climb a significant ways if you string together a few more decent performances. So from the standpoint of opportunity, it exists. From the standpoint of draft capital, it exists. The other thing, unlike Treylon Burks, unlike Rashad Bateman, unlike thus far Quentin Johnston, as you mentioned, you go back to 2022, this guy was highly explosive. His opportunity wasn't immense relative to Terry McLaurin, but he was neck and neck with McLaurin many times in a lot of these metrics when it came to, target distance and air yards, and I think it's fantasy points per target. Yeah. So fantasy points per target, obviously, because of what had happened last year, number 6 in the league. So we saw a player get utilized with different quarterback play and a different offense. Here we are in 2023. I think the buy low window is still wide open for him. But when you get games like this, again, it puts everybody's mind back focused on a guy like him. So if you're looking to buy in right now, again, using fantasycalc.com, he's relative to a 2026 first round pick. If he performs like he did again, I wouldn't really have much concern kicking a first round pick can down the road 2 full years to get a guy like this. I mean, that guy's not getting anything for Jahan Dotson for 2 seasons, and you have no idea what your team's going to look like. I like Dotson. I think McLaurin being there is obviously always going to be the bigger issue, and this is what we talked about last episode. You look at wide receiver 2s and offenses, you have to be a high-volume offense. If he's going to continue to get the Jordan Addison-esque treatment, 7 targets, 8 targets, then I really like him. If he's going to be your other typical wide receiver 2, Michael Wilson, 4 targets, then I don't know how much I actually love to own a guy like that. So it's sort of yet to be determined, but the upside is there. It's been realized in the past, and here we are so far, it revealing itself a little more once again.
Absolutely. And again, I think some of these other guys like Gibson and Curtis Samuel are eating into some of his target share, but they're passing so much that he has potential to, and he's already shown it in week 8 to get a high number of targets. And Curtis Samuel's out of here in after 2023 season. So I think there's ample opportunity for him to be more involved in this offense, especially going into year 3.
So, I mentioned Sam Howell was the best quarterback in the class, and I mentioned that I don't know how Kenny Pickett went before him, and Kenny Pickett leads to George Pickens, who is the next player we want to talk about on this list. George Pickens, he looks like a dude, okay? He looks like an absolute man out there. He looks like Dez Bryant. He's got a my ball mentality, explosive profile, Debbie Darling once upon a time, prior to injuries and the college production and the draft and what had happened on his way out. He was supposed to be the number 1 unanimous pick amongst wide receivers in the class. We look at him so far this year, a 7-target game, a 10-target game, a 7-target game, a 10-target game, an 8-target game. Much of this, though, and again, top 11 performances, more than 22 fantasy points. Much of this, though, came while Deontay Johnson was unavailable. Now, Deontay Johnson has been back 2 weeks. The first week was coming off of injury. The second week, a full week back. And as we can see, in week 8, George Pickens 5 targets. Deontay Johnson almost triple that. 14 targets. What's the story with George Pickens?
I think the story is the concern is that Deontay Johnson is known to be this elite separator in the league, and George Pickens is one of these monster contested catch players. It's fairly evident by 2022 data, and now kind of with Deontay coming back in, that this offense is going to get the ball to the guy who can separate. And that doesn't mean that George Pickens doesn't have big playability, but it's that Deontay Johnson is going to continue to be a problem for George Pickens to be a wide receiver, to ever be a wide receiver 1. Prior to that, with it, he was a monster. He had top 12 target share. He was top 10 in first read target share. He was top 7 in yards per route run, top 3 in yards after catch per reception. I think the yards after catch is still up for play here, but I think really the first read target share, and then this is all stuff that Scott Barrett tweeted out, so shout out Scott Barrett. This is all since week 2 with Deontay going out. I think that it's going to be more of a conversation of Deontay is going to have a larger target share in this offense, and you're just going to be banking on big playability from George Pickens.
13.5 average depth of target for Deontay Johnson. If I go sort here, looking at his ADOT from the year prior, 10.7 last year, and then below 9 or below for the 2 years prior. So 3+ yards over that number right now, 4+ yards over that number from 2 years ago. And we know that George Pickens is a big play guy. I mean, it's evident here, 22.6 for his ADOT. I just think that the argument that I made for Deontay over Pickens, by the way, another YouTube short that people tried to dump on me for. I know that it was all about target share. Like at the position, it's about volume, right? And we know we could go ahead and sort to the quarterback player. So we're sorted by pass attempts. Let's scroll down till we get to Kenny Pickett. Imagine as I'm scrolling down, you're hearing that like yodeler song from The Price is Right. As we're going all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, Kenny Pickett, 28.6 pass attempts per game, which is 10 lower per game than Cousins, Howell, Mahomes, bordering on Burrow, Goff. 10 pass attempts per game less. So when the volume isn't even there and your quarterback play isn't that efficient, I think it's evident to me that Deontay Johnson just plays a style of football that for a quarterback like Kenny Pickett, it's just much easier to deal with. And he was actually being utilized in a much more explosive fashion than he has been used of late. So I think that my concern for Pickens is that even though he's a great player and he's very explosive, I think those opportunities are going to be few and far between because it's going to require Kenny Pickett to take great risk to let him do what he does. And Deontay Johnson has proved year over year that he's just that soft, easy target for his quarterback. And whether it's Big Ben or it's Mitchell Trubisky or it's Kenny Pickett, they're just going to lean into him as a function of this offense.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's just a risk that with him, I think we were looking up the contract for Deontay that he signed, last year before the season started. I think it was, do you have
I think I got it if I go back one here. Hold on, let's go. Right there. So he has signed through 2024. He's got $10 million $5.8 million of dead cap in 2024, but he signed all the way till the end of 2024.
Yeah, so again, that eats into another year. That's Pickens' third year. Oh, there's a trick-or-treater, sorry for that. And then third year for Pickens. So potentially he could be out, but he could easily re-sign, especially if he's going to be a big part of this offense. And who knows what, if Kenny Pickett's still the quarterback, if he continues to play sort of at this like average level. But Steelers are kind of those teams that would probably stick with Pickett and through his first round contract. I think it limits George Pickens. I think if you're one of those guys that has Pickens and he's done really well for you, I would think about maybe potentially moving off of Pickens to for draft picks or another player. There's the dog.
You got like a Pomeranian over there or something?
Oh, we've got little Shih Tzus here. So
you can't say that on this podcast. I'm gonna have to bleep that out.
Oh gosh.
Kenny Pickett, QB 27 in the league right now, with 16 total deep ball attempts. This is what's really interesting. So let's see here. Danger plays on Player Profiler. It says he's number 23. But what's very interesting, and I'm gonna go and do this in real time. I'm gonna pull this up. I'm gonna bring up a new page over here. This is what we do on the show. We take big risks for the sake of context. I'm gonna zoom in. As we've mentioned on the show before, we look at aggressiveness as a quarterback, and that's like how risky, how tight the window is that you're throwing to. And if we sort top of the league, Kenny Pickett, number 2 in the league right now, 23.5 on the aggressiveness scale.
So, yeah, I think that could help Pickens with the big play. And if he's throw more tight windows, and Pickens is one of those really good, he's phenomenal contested catch receivers. He's basically always open when he's covered by a receiver, but that's probably the case for him, that Kenny Pickett stays as the quarterback. He will continue to be aggressive, but it will probably be it will be like a Gabe Davis situation where you're just waiting for a big game.
I like Pickens. We know that Deontay Johnson's going to be here for a few more years. I just think what's the most troubling part of it is he's going to age well into it. He's 27 now, I think. And so 27 and a half. In 3 years, he's still going to be sort of this shorter area, semi-sure-handed, minus these drops that we've seen. receiver that's just easy to go to. Whether if Pittsburgh sticks with Pickett, that's maybe one of the other really concerning factors. But I like George Pickens. I guess we should also look at where George Pickens is currently being valued. So wide receiver 24 is a very interesting situation because you've got to be producing some serious fantasy production. I understand that throughout the duration of time that Deontay was gone, there were some bigger games in there, but to be essentially a wide receiver 2 value, and that will put him, let's look here. So he is essentially valued at right about the range of a 2024 first. So I think if you're the guy that has that first and you were considering buying Pickens, it's a bit concerning watching just the immense inverse scenario that we witnessed with the target share to Deontay. So anyways, context is everything. We're going to learn more as the season goes along. But thank you guys for tuning in. Once again, last week's show was exceptional. The podcast did well. The YouTube video did well. If you guys enjoyed the content, make sure you hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button, of course. Help us boost this channel. If you're listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, what is there? Is there other ones?
Other podcasting platforms.
Other podcasting platforms. Make sure you guys rate and review the show. It's a real treat for us. When you do that, it would be a great benefit to this growing. I'm trying to think of a Halloween. I can't come up with a Halloween pun right now. I'm really struggling. Anyways, make sure you guys rate and review the show. Of course, in the description, you guys will see a link for the Discord channel. Of course, go join that and visit dynastyrankings.com. Updates are coming. Alexander and I are having a meeting here hopefully this week, go over a couple more things. So things are in the work. I'm gonna keep advertising it because I need to. But if you go there right now, you're gonna see a landing page. And I think that that's pretty much it right now. But eventually, you're going to see much, much more than that. So, guys, thank you very much for checking out the show. And we will see you guys next week with another episode of the Dynasty Rankings podcast.